Hello all and welcome to the 1 vs 2 where I'm looking at the Darksiders games for the Wii U. So, no point in dragging out the intro, let's do this. In this comparison I am purely going to be looking at the Wii U versions of both games. I've only played both games once and I really don't know which one I prefer, as both games do certain things better than the other, so I'm going to go down the point scoring route on this occasion, just like I did with the Bayonetta comparison, so that I don't have to say Darksiders every 15 seconds, I'll be calling them D1 and D2. There won't be any major spoilers along the way, but there may be a few minor things ruined. Might as well get everything underway with the plot. Now, I could just give a brief explanation of each game's plot, award the point and go have a cup of tea, but I'm going to pretend I'm more thorough than that, so I'll take a slightly more in-depth look at what each game is about. But first, a little backstory about the Apocalypse. The Book of Revelations in the New Testament of the Bible describes a series of events leading up to the Second Coming. The first is the 7 seals being released, which cue the 7 angelic trumpets, which in turn cue the 7 bold judgments. The first 4 seals each release one of the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse, with each horseman having their own mission. D1 decides that's far too complicated and makes it so that all 4 horsemen would be summoned upon the breaking of the 7th seal. There's the usual realms of angels, demons and mankind, with the Charred Council keeping the balance until the end war takes place and the seals are broken. Long story short, War answers the call of the seal, arrives on Earth and starts kicking ass, but the other horsemen don't appear. He finds out the 7th seal had not been broken and the Charred Council accuse him of upsetting the balance, starting the apocalypse early and siding with the forces of hell. He maintains that he heard the call and asks to be sent back to Earth to bring to justice those responsible for framing him.
Send me back. I will punish the ones responsible.
How? What hope do you have against the Destroyers' armies? You are powerless.
Then I will fail, and the demons will have carried out your sentence.
D2 stars one of the other horsemen, Death, who seeks to resurrect mankind and prove War's innocence. That's actually pretty much it for D2's story, but this is where things greatly differ between the two games. In D1, you're sent back to Earth 100 years after the war at the beginning of the game and are told to seek out Samael, as he will be able to help you find those responsible for what happened. It's not long before you find him and he tells you what you need to do.
But you will need to get inside the Destroyers Spire. The tower is guarded by 4 of his chosen. Bring me their hearts and ask me no questions. My reasons for helping you are my own.
And that's what you do, hunt down the 4 Guardians, all the while waging war against angels, demons and furniture, because why not? It's very Zelda-esque, travelling to a Guardian's lair, working your way through the lair, acquiring new weapons and tools, get to the Guardian and then battling them to rip out their heart. You then use the items and abilities you've just obtained to progress further and get to the next Guardian. I won't spoil the ending, but as you progress through the game, you start piecing together what happened and the truth behind the events 100 years ago.
Tainted blood. Why his accursed power beats within our breast.
D2 takes place during the 100 years between the Apocalypse and D1. It is explained that the 4 horsemen, War, Death and, for some reason, Fury and Strife rather than Conquest and Famine, but what the hell, we'll roll with it, were part of the Nephilim, a fusion of angels and demons that waged war on creation. The 4 horsemen were given great power if they destroyed the rest of the Nephilim. They did, but Death kept their souls in an amulet rather than destroying them as per the Charred Council's orders. To try and restore mankind and clear War of his supposed crimes, he speaks to the Crow Father, who tells Death he needs to go to the Tree of Life located in the Forge Lands, but there's a problem.
Life. This world is dying, lad. Choking on chaos and corruption. We can do little to stop it. Soon, the great tree too shall perish, and with it, the last of my people. Is that no?
So you venture around to free the Forge Lands from corruption and go to the tree. End of game, right? Wrong. You end up being pulled into the kingdom of the dead by someone who has a grudge against you, and you find out you need to go to the Well of Souls to resurrect humanity. The Lord of Bones can grant you access to the city of the dead, where someone is located who can tell you all you need to know. End of game, right? Wrong. You get told the well requires 2 keys to open. One is with the angels and the other with the demons, so off you go to get them. Fairly straightforward mission, right? Wrong. Are you seeing a pattern here? I've massively simplified what's going on, seeing as I haven't mentioned the corruption in other areas, the Nephilim, things that were kept secret and other things you have to do to complete one goal. The game just can't focus on one thing. I'll give you an example.
The other 2 heartstones were pure. I'm wagering that their radiance will cleanse the 3rd.
As I mentioned, upon arriving in the Kingdom of the Dead, you need to speak to the Lord of Bones to find out how to get to the Well of Souls. Once you've tracked him down, his Chancellor tells you that you need to prove you are worthy for an audience with the Lord, which is a piss take in itself. He's freaking death, but what the hell, we'll roll with it. He tells you to go to the Colosseum and defeat the champion, so you go to the Colosseum only to be told you need to summon the champion by finding 3 gems. You wander around, find the gems, the champion is summoned, you fight, win, and get granted an audience with the Lord. Hallelujah! Mission complete, right? Wrong. He sends you on a mission.
Need more subjects. True. Yet I must face this rabble without the lords who serve me.
That's not my concern.
Make it your concern, and I will grant your request. Find my 3 dead lords and wake them from their slumber.
The first lord I did was a simple case of get to the end of a dungeon, fight him, he joined you. But the next one...
There are souls lost, waiting to be judged and sent into the city of the dead. I have heard 3 such spirits wandering the corridors. Find them and bring them back to me. Once I have cleansed them of their past, I will hear what troubles the Lord of Bones.
So you venture around finding 3 souls for him to judge, and only then will he agree to go with you. But then, the 3rd lord appears, and what does he do? Gives you a damn quest taking you back to the Colosseum to kick someone else's ass. So you do that, finally go see the king and get the info you wanted, right? Wrong. Turns out he doesn't know and tells you where someone else is who does.
Who knows the way to the Well of Souls.
Things like that happen all the time throughout the game. You'll go somewhere to do one thing, but will end up having to do all sorts of bullshit instead, to the point I actually forgot what the story was all about beyond clear war of his crimes, let alone everything else that's going on, how they all link together, and what they have to do with the main story. At least D1 has its story and sticks to it. It may throw a few curveballs at you along the way, and it isn't completely straightforward and devoid of smaller aspects, but it's a hell of a lot more focused. Point to Darksiders 1, and now I really need that cup of tea. Oh, that's a good cup of tea. Right, next category is the characters you come across during the game. I suppose we should start with the main characters, War and Death. Both are quite sullen, almost brooding characters, so in terms of personality, they're mostly the same, but given War's situation, he always seemed a bit more no-nonsense. Granted, both have their badass moments and lines, but War always seemed to be a bit more menacing, as though if someone did something annoying, he'd say, "Do that again and I'll kill you." Then as they went to do it again, he'd cut them in half. But Death would be more, "That's annoying. Seriously, stop doing that. It's annoying. One more time and you'll regret it." And then he'd stick his side down their throat.
Open the portal.
As far as other characters are concerned, I originally planned going through most of the characters individually, but with how many there were, it took ages, so I'm just going to cover the main ones briefly, like the Watcher, who the Charred Council bound to War to ensure he stays loyal to the Council. He was a decent character, and it always seems as though he was supposed to be a comedic relief, but he rarely had any decent lines. Then again, there was a point where you had to fight in an arena while the crowd cheered for blood, and all I could think of was the Gladiator film with that classic line, "Are you not entertained?" But then out pops the Watcher who asks,
Are you not entertained?
Coincidence? I think not. The only thing that got a little tedious with him was constantly saying how he'd tell on you to the Charred Council if you disobeyed, though seeing as he's a Watcher, I doubt he'd be particularly strong, so he probably wouldn't be able to actually do anything himself. He was voiced by Mark Hamill, so that's always a bonus. Then we have Samael, who is proper badass. Granted, he's only in half a dozen scenes, which is a huge shame, but when he is, he's rather menacing and someone I certainly wouldn't want to piss off, but War isn't too worried about that.
What stories will she tell me about you, Samael?
Careful, or your ending will be a tragic one. Sometimes the hero dies in the end.
Next up is Ulthane, who is probably my favourite character from the game. Loud, obnoxious, imposing, and awesome. He's another one who doesn't appear all that much, but when he does, he's genius and has some cracking lines.
That's what you get for touching what ain't yours.
Another character I'd like to have seen more of.
It's you.
Do your worst. But let me tell you a little secret, boy. The one in the dirt is by far the easier of the two.
On to some of the angels. Uriel fought for heaven during the war 100 years ago, has pretty much decided you're guilty of your supposed crimes and for the death of Abaddon, a fellow angel, but as you can't be punished yet, she's decided to punish you herself and turns up a few times during the game. She's a decent character, your typical femme fatale, but she does play a fairly large role towards the end of the game with various events taking place I won't spoil, but make for some decent twists. There are a few other angel characters along the way, like Azrael, but appear later in the game, so not much to say about them, really. Last person to mention is Vulgrim. He helps you out with a few hints at the start, but mainly he's just creepy, and I love it. His voice, mannerisms, lines, everything, and it all works beautifully together, and it's a shame he quickly becomes a regular merchant as he loses those awesome lines.
There were a few young ones. Spectacular.
Now on to D2, where there aren't really any, I say main characters aside from Death, but there are a lot of other people that show up. The problem is that they aren't in it for too long. The first main area is the Forge Lands, and here you come across makers. There are several you speak to who give you quests, sell things, or are central to the plot and advancing the story, like Thane, Muria, Alia, and Elder Idad, but once you've done what you need to and moved on to the Kingdom of the Dead, you don't have to go back at all unless you want to wrap up some of the side quests. The Kingdom of the Dead doesn't have many characters, but the Lord of Bones is cool, and his Chancellor has a couple of good lines. Thing is, neither of them make a huge appearance, and again, once you've done what you need to and moved on, you don't speak to them again.
I'm not sure if I could live with myself.
Uriel turns up again, who is pretty much the same badass she was in the first game. It's one of those, you didn't do anything wrong, but someone you're related to did, so I'll punish you because they aren't around, but I need your help so I won't situations. Besides, she wants to kill Death. She really didn't think that one through, but anyway, the other angels are okay, I guess. They fill their role well enough, but again, don't appear enough to really start caring about them. Vulgrim also makes a return, but alas, aside from your first meeting with him, he doesn't appear in any cutscenes, so the creepiness he had in the previous game is pretty much gone. Last person to really talk about is Ostagoth, who gives advice and answers questions. He appears in quite a few places and is a cool character, but he's a merchant first and foremost, so he doesn't really become anything spectacular.
Part demons from their coins, and you from their souls.
There are a handful of other characters in the game you fight or speak to in order to complete a mission and advance the story, but seeing as the game takes place in so many different locations, none of the characters are really that memorable. Granted, there are a couple of exceptions like Lilith, and Samael makes a return. That's not a spoiler, he appears in the game's trailer, but again, their paths are so brief they don't get a chance to properly flourish, which is a recurring problem right from the start, and it affects the vast majority of characters, though I would really have liked to see more Lilith. She was cool. D1 is able to allow the few characters it has to make their mark and leave a much more lasting impression, so point to Darksiders 1.
She will stop at nothing to punish the one responsible.
Now we're on to the combat, which both games do quite differently. In D1, your main weapon is a massive sword called Chaos Eater, and that's all you have until you can buy a giant scythe from Vulgrim. You eventually get a gauntlet to punch your enemies into oblivion, but I found the sword and scythe did the job well. Plus, leveling up is done by weapon rather than war himself, so as you use your weapon, it gains experience, levels up, and then you can use the souls you've collected from defeating enemies, chests located around the place, and furniture, because why not, to buy new skills and abilities. As I mainly used the sword and scythe, it was only those I leveled up. The gauntlet was only used when it needed to be used. I bought a few useful abilities which I used to annihilate my foes, and although my battle combos were a tad limited, I still enjoyed hacking everyone up. Once an enemy's health gets low, you can do an execution. Some of them were proper nasty, and I loved doing them. You also have some rat abilities which you can use, but again, I only bought ones I would actually use and upgraded them. They add some variation to the combat, especially during large crowds or bosses. I found the sword and scythe did the job well, but it's always nice to have a few extra tricks up your sleeve. Then there's the Chaos Form, which you can build up the energy for and then use for short periods of time, and it's pretty much the everything will soon be dead form. It was great tearing through my enemies, even if it was a tad clunky to use. D2 has a vastly different combat system. While you generally use Death's twin size, you also have a secondary weapon and you can choose what type of weapon it is. I chose the giant head smashing hammer. Each weapon has stats and bonus effects, and as you progress you find stronger weapons, armor, talismans and all sorts of equipment to beef out Death. It's also the usual experience-based character level up system which, aside from the usual stat boost, affects what you can use in the Wrath ability skill trees. He has two trees, Harbinger, which are mainly melee abilities, and Necromancer, which are more ranged powers. You get a point to spend each time you level up, and each ability can be boosted, but as always, I don't like spending points on abilities I won't use, so stuck with certain ones, beefed them out and wrecked everything. Executions are back, but this time they are done on random chance rather than just getting your enemy's health low. The chance can be boosted, but I was able to hack them up quick enough anyway, so didn't really need them. Death also has a Reaper form, but I actually forgot about it, so didn't use it all that much. As with War's Chaos form, it's great for hacking up some of the tougher enemies, but again it's a tad clunky to control. The only thing that was a tad annoying was possessed weapons. It's a great idea, feeding the weapon other weapons to be able to boost certain aspects, and it can make for some amazing weapons, but seeing as found weapons based stats increase as you level up, it's annoying when you use a load of weapons to make a good new weapon and then level up, knowing you can now find a better base weapon that would have put the sacrificed weapons to much better use. Even so, the combos you can use combining the main and secondary weapons together are much more varied than what you can do in Darksiders 1. Darksiders 1 did do the combat side of things well, and I very much enjoyed slaughtering everything I could, but Darksiders 2 takes everything up a notch and gets the point. Both games have some amazing puzzles. They both start fairly simple and straightforward, but as you gain more items and abilities to use, the puzzles become more and more complex. The puzzles range from simple finding keys to doors and activating switches to unlock gates, to all manner of crazy contraption. In D1, the highlight for me was when the game fell over, cracked its head on the bathroom sink, and forgot that it wasn't Portal, which I haven't played. You get an ability to create portals, and the dungeon this was used in gave some absolutely fantastic puzzles, and I loved it. Some of them were rather complex, but eventually I solved them and felt very pleased with myself doing so, as well as being rather impressed with the people who came up with them. D2 was very similar in its puzzle delivery, starting off simple and then adding in extra puzzles as you learn new abilities. What was really good was that as you get some different abilities in D2, it has puzzles that mix certain abilities together, such as gaining an ability that makes Death's soul split into two beings, as well as creating a stone statue, which made for some decent puzzles in itself, but when you then also get the portal ability, you then have to use abilities like the soul split in conjunction with the portals to progress. It didn't use the portal ability quite to the extent that D1 did, but it did fall over, smack its head on the kitchen sink and forgot that it wasn't left for dead, which I also played. Granted, both games have sections where you grab a massive gun and shoot your way through, but the one in D2 lasted longer, and if saying the Portal parts in D1 was a rip-off of Portal, this part of D2 was a rip-off of Left 4 Dead. It was still a fun, enjoyable part, and you didn't have to use the gun, but it did make things a lot easier, especially when some of the more massive enemies come at you. It was great that D2 had all new abilities and combined abilities together to make new puzzles, rather than just rehashing the same old puzzles from D1. Even so, there were very few times in D2 where I solved a puzzle and thought, that's amazing, but in D1 it happened multiple times, so although Darksiders 2 still did the puzzle aspect well, I have to give the point to Darksiders 1. Every game has a few issues that get found by players, little bugs and glitches that can sometimes add to the experience, and with both Darksiders games, Oh, where to start? In D1, the very first glitch that happened was when I was fighting a few baddies, when all of a sudden I somehow got out of bounds and I couldn't get back in to finish the fight. Don't worry about the dodgy audio, it was a recording problem, so I ended up just running around looking at the sights. But I ended up wandering too far, fell off the stage and had to reload my last save. I'd like to say glitches from then on were minor, like voices not loading into cutscenes or War's sword not loading properly, but alas, there were other game-breaking bugs, with the biggest offender being in the Portal-esque stage, when the game kept freezing at the same point. I tried to make a portal, but for some reason, it kept freezing. That wasn't the only place it did it, but it was the worst. Some glitches could be funny, but glitches in general happened a lot. When I moved on to D2, I was hoping things would be all okay, but no. Again, there were some glitches that were funny, maybe just a short clipping problem, or only brief and had no major effect, but as with D1, there were some freeze glitches as well. There may not have been anything special going on, just a bit of wall running and BAM! Frozen. One of the more annoying ones was during a fight with Samael. When I first fought him, at one point he just walked off the edge of the platform, which was part hilarious, part a sign something was wrong. The fight continued and clearly there was something wrong. As you can see from my health, it was a close fight, but I used all my skill and managed to beat him. There was a cutscene and nothing happened. After I don't know how long of running around, I decided to reload the save and try again. Turns out there was supposed to be a cutscene where Samael dragged the platform I'm on across the room, so when I won, I could get to where I needed to be. It's difficult to decide which game gets the point here, seeing as they both had multiple issues. Darksiders 1 probably had the most glitches, and some of the game-breaking ones kept occurring, whereas with Darksiders 2, they happened once and that was it, so I suppose a point can go to Darksiders 2. Next up is the side quests, and there are plenty of things to find and do in your travels. In D1, you can find shards that increase your health or wrath if you find 4 of them. There are also 20 artifacts which Vulgrim asks you to find. When you find the map to an area, it shows you where the locations of chests and artifacts are, so for places there isn't a map, you've just got to look. Any you find can be sold to Vulgrim. Then you've got the 10 pieces of the Abyssal armor scattered throughout the land. I didn't find all 10, but apparently the Abyssal armor gives you a massive defense boost. That's kind of it for collectibles in D1, and as there aren't many characters, there's no one to provide any proper side quests, so we'll just move on to D2. There aren't any items that increase Death's Wrath or health, seeing as they increase it as he levels up, but there are plenty of other things to find. You still have artifacts to find, but Ostigos wants them instead of Vulgrim, but Vulgrim asks you to collect pages from the Book of the Dead, and when you complete a 10-page chapter, he gives you a key to a tomb that contains all sorts of goodies. Then there's Blackroot, who asks you to find various stones, and depending on what you give him, will earn you various rewards. Then there's the actual side quests.
These are what we makers call death. You kill them all, and mayhaps I will grant you are the true Reaper.
Sounds like a challenge.
When you speak to people throughout the game, they ask you to do various things from finding something they lost to killing a specific enemy, so it's your usual side quest stuff. Though it's great when you see something and think, what the hell is that? And then you go find something that makes you go, oh, I see, and then you go kick ass. There are a lot of quests to do throughout the game, and that's without things like the Crucible, which is essentially wave after wave of enemies that you have to defeat, so it's essentially this game's version of the Cave of Ordeal, Savage Labyrinth and Trial of the Sword from the Zelda games. Some of the quests are worth doing, as the rewards can be pretty good, even if it's just some experience, but others just give you money, which is quite easy to come across anyway. Granted, there may not be as many quests as you'd get in something like Xenoblade Chronicles or Skyrim, but Darksiders 2 has a lot more than Darksiders 1, so the point goes to Darksiders 2. Just be careful when you're looking for goodies in Darksiders 2, because in the Foundry, there's a small pool of water in an enclosed area which, if you jump into it, you can't get back out again. Guess how I found out about that? Well, that's 3 points each. I'm not going to give random points for minor things or take points away for annoying things like control issues during time-sensitive sections that screwed me over, even if it did happen time and time again and got really annoying because those sections were few and far between. So I guess there's only one thing left to look at: replay value. D1 has the better plot and characters, whereas D2 has the better combat system and side quests. In terms of actual playtime, D2 absolutely smashes D1. I know D2 has a lot of DLC packs included, but even if you take those out, D2 would still be a much bigger game than D1. However, given the better story and more interesting characters of D1, they would make for a much more enjoyable run through of the game first time round, seeing as it still had a decent combat system and some alright side quests. Both games have multiple difficulties, so neither game benefits there, but ultimately I have to ask myself one question. If I could only replay one of them, which one would I choose to replay? It would be Darksiders 2. Although I said Darksiders 1 has the better story and characters but still had decent combat and side quests, Darksiders 2 has the better combat and side quests, but it still has a good, if all over the place, story and some likeable characters. Thing is, there's so much to do in the game that there were some major parts to the game I didn't get round to doing, like Argyl's Tomb, finishing the Crucible, and a load of the side quests, some of which apparently open up other side quests. So I finished the game, but I still had a hell of a lot to do, and that's without getting death to max level, finding equipment, making badass weapons and all that. So for replay value and longevity, Darksiders 2 takes the point and the crown. It's pretty much the same as the X-Men Legends 1 vs 2 in that if you're going for just a single playthrough, you're probably better off just going for the first one, but in terms of gameplay hours and things to do, Darksiders 2 will keep you going for a hell of a lot longer. Even so, both games were a joy to play, and I really hope Darksiders 3 gets a Switch port. See you next time.